In previous sections, I mentioned the operational definition of a variable. That may have prompted you to think about how the meaning of our results is influenced by the way we measure or manipulate the variable. In this section, we'll introduce a few more related terms and concepts to help you gain knowledge from the information in the articles. We'll revisit a number of these ideas and think about them from a different perspective when we talk about selecting a measure to conduct a study. We can think about three broad categories of measurement: physiological, self-report, and observation, sometimes referred to as motor responses. I have a feeling the ideas are pretty straightforward, but want to make sure to note one thing. When we're talking about measurement, we're talking about specific processes and procedures. In other words, self-report is different than a casual conversation or even a questionnaire on the internet, and observation is different than people watching. Measurement provides information about our variable, but we need to consider a number of questions in determining what the information means. One of the questions is whether the measurement is consistent, otherwise known as reliable. If it's not consistent, we really can't draw any knowledge from the results because we don't know how much variation is because of what we're interested in and how much of it's because of the measure. When I think about reliability, I think about an old bathroom scale we used to have. It was analog and not digital. And at one point, it must have gotten too damp and rusted. I could weigh 3 times within a minute of each other and get 3 different results. In other words, it wasn't very reliable. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure why we kept it around so long. The process I've described in taking multiple measures would be what we call test-retest reliability. We'll talk about that and other forms of reliability when we talk about measures for the first project. For now, it's good to know what reliability is. If a measure is reliable, then we need to ask what we're measuring. We need to question the validity of the measure. The types of validity can be a little overwhelming, but I have a feeling the idea is familiar. If you've ever heard someone say, "I knew the material, I just have a hard time with multiple choice tests," you've heard someone question the validity of a measure. We typically talk about manipulated variables in the context of experiments. When we're investigating cause and effect claims, we manipulate the variable to determine the effects. In those cases, the manipulated variable is known as the independent variable. Research related to stress, among other things, also represents another context when we manipulate a variable, though. More specifically, we can manipulate a variable to create a context to measure another variable, but do so in a way that everyone is measured in the same context. In those cases, it's part of the research design, but not used in a way that allows us to evaluate cause and effects related to that variable. Here, for example, if we want to understand how responses to stress vary depending on personality, we would measure responses to stress and personality. But we might want to make sure we're really measuring how participants respond when stressed. So we would need to manipulate their stress level. We could do that by telling them they need to take a very difficult test, and if they don't pass, they won't be able to graduate. We'll talk about ethics in a future unit. We frequently talk about reliability and validity in the context of measurement, but the ideas apply to manipulation as well. When we ask about reliability, we'll ask whether the way the manipulation was designed would allow for consistency across participants. When we ask about validity, we'll ask if the researchers are creating conditions or contexts that represent their conceptual variable. Now, given what you've learned about APA style, where would you expect to find the information about operational definitions of the variables? First paragraph of the method section? Last paragraph of the results section? Last paragraph or section of the introduction? First paragraph of the discussion? The abstract might include some of that information, but the details about measurement and manipulation will be in the method section. More specifically, measurement will be in the materials section, and manipulation will usually be detailed in the procedures. In the first section of this unit, I mentioned that citations are used to give credit for ideas. Ideally, authors will provide information about the reliability and validity of the measure or manipulation, but that's not always the case. A citation can be used as a signal that those characteristics have been considered before, though, as it means they have been used in previously published work.